Even now, 25 years after her death in 1979, at the age of 59, composer Julia Perry's life and career remain enigmatic. Helen Walker Hill's chapter on Perry in her book From Spirituals to Symphonies is still the most complete study of Perry's life we have to date. Briefly, Perry was born in 1924 and grew up in Akron, Ohio. She studied voice, piano, and violin throughout high school, adding composition and conducting in college. She received her bachelor and master of music degrees from Westminster Choir College in 1947 and 1948. Talented, hardworking, and ambitious, Perry sought out opportunities to make herself known as a conductor, composer, and vocalist. During the 1950s, she was in high demand in the US and in Europe, performing and conducting her own pieces. She received prestigious commissions and fellowships and had her work recorded. But as Helen Walker Hill has written, Perry's outlook, interests, and even personality changed dramatically during the 50s. In 1953, she declared that she was no longer a singer, and in 1956, a friend reported that she had become religious in a rather obsessive way. In 1959, her friend Patricia Sides described the once extroverted Perry as having become peculiar, difficult, and quick to take offense. Perry made demands of composers' recordings that alienated the company, cut off many of her friends, and stopped performing altogether. Walker Hill suggested these changes may have stemmed from the onset and development of acromegaly, a condition that causes enlarged hands, feet, and face, fatigue and joint weakness, limited mobility, a deepened voice, and other physical changes. We've all witnessed the cruelty of the classical musical world when it comes to appearance, and so I sympathize with Perry and her apparent desire to control who had access to her. She struggled to find long-term work, but continued to compose prolifically, although she found few performers to program her works. The last piece published conventionally during her lifetime was Homunculus CF. In 1970, she suffered the first of 3 debilitating strokes. Although she taught herself to write with her left hand, she spoke with difficulty and frequently seemed to be confused, submitting the same scores to the same publishers repeatedly, losing scores and documents, and slowly becoming unable to care for herself. Her scores, never the most legible, became even more difficult to parse, and even the performers with whom she had worked before rejected her submissions. Colleagues urged her to donate her papers to Fisk University or other places capable of preserving them, but she did not, and after her death in 1979, nearly half of her pieces were lost. Her papers and scores now reside in several different places: Westminster Choir College, Fisk, Center for Black Music Research at Columbia College, Chicago, the AMRC in Boulder, the New York Philharmonic Orchestra Archives, and who knows, probably other places. The identities and existence of other works are in doubt. In one case, Walker Hill documented Perry's Symphony No. 3 as being published by Carl Fischer. The Fischer site indicated that it had Perry's Symphonic Band Symphony, which is generally considered the same as her Symphony No. 6. But a Fischer representative told me that the only large ensemble work they had in their catalog for her was her Concerto for Violin and Orchestra, about which more in a moment. Perry's extant papers and scores are poorly collected and lack cataloging. There are issues of version control because Perry heavily revised some works or made them into new works. There are the issues of titles because sometimes she gave works different titles for different occasions. Walker Hill cites Perry's sister, Lucy Perry Bigby, as her sole heir, but researchers have been unable to locate her. The Westminster Choir College collection notes that their materials were donated by Alicia Berry, Perry's younger sister. And while I have found that she is 95 and was registered to vote in Ohio as of 2020, I have not been able to contact her. This lack of contact is important because without it, many of Perry's pieces become orphan works. An orphan work, as many of you know, is a copyright protected work for which rights holders are positively indeterminate or uncontactable. The US Copyright Office has written of art orphan works that the uncertainty surrounding the ownership status of orphan works does not serve the objectives of the copyright system. For good faith users, orphan works are a frustration, a liability risk, and a major cause of gridlock in the digital marketplace. In 2015, writing about the digitization of and providing access to orphan works, the Association of Research Libraries held that a library is on firmer ground when the item is an orphan work. The inability to positively identify, locate, and contact a living heir for Perry also means her works fall under the 4th fair use factor, that of the impact of the market for her work. This holds that if heirs are not benefiting from her work, it is likely that there is no market for the work. But in the case of Perry, there's considerable interest on the part of researchers and performers, as well as some publishers for whom the scores could be of monetary value. The issues of who owns the rights to what in Perry's catalog is also further complicated by conflicting statements and stamps on some of her works regarding copyright and licensing rights. So then, how do we proceed with the sharing of Perry's works? I decided to use Humanities Commons. And I use this to create a repository for Perry's works and related materials. I've used Humanities Commons for a long time to host my own website, one of my books, and other endeavors. Humanities Commons has the very best support staff I have ever encountered and a host of digital tools for librarians, instructors, and others working in the humanities. H-Commons, as it describes itself, is a place to discover the latest open access scholarship and teaching materials, make interdisciplinary connections, build a WordPress website, and increase the impact of your work by sharing it in the repository. I called the group the Julia Perry Working Group, modeling it on scholarly working groups I'm involved with elsewhere. Humanities Commons group pages offer a discussion forum, an easy way of uploading documents to a repository associated with the group, and a way to communicate with people who sign up as members of the group. I had a number of things to take into consideration when creating the group site and uploading scores and other documents to it. Access and its many meanings played a large role in my decision. Although there are multiple copies of the same scores in several places, not everyone can travel to the archives and libraries that have them. It seemed illogical that the AMRC at Boulder could have a special collection that was just photocopies, but that researchers could or should not share their own scans of those copies with one another or with performers. So it only made sense to have a repository here for Perry's materials. Making the scores and other documents completely open access was central for me. Funding and/or institutional status has no place in dictating what materials scholars and performers can access and use. Information wants to be free, and I don't want to be a cop. With a few exceptions, I firmly believe that the materials fall under fair use. The exceptions would be the handful of pieces Perry published with publishers, some of which have gone out of business and others where the copyright is nebulous. I decided that if rights holders wanted any scores or documents removed, I would do so at their request, but that I would share everything that I had. This is the better to ask forgiveness than permission tactic. In 2021, Carl Fisher manager Jay Berger emailed me asking why I had not asked for permission to share the manuscript of the violin concerto, which does bear in Perry's handwriting the text "Rental Carl Fisher Music Pub." I told him where I'd gotten the score, what the purpose of sharing it was, how the manuscript appeared currently unusable for performance, and asked how to get his permission. He responded that I had missed his point, that lots of people were renting Fisher's score and parts for this piece, and again, that I should have asked him for permission. I alerted members of the working group that we might lose access to the score and they should download it ASAP if they thought they were ever going to want it. I replied to Berger asking again what I needed to do to get that permission, fill out a form, do whatever, and also asked whether Fisher had had the piece engraved, and if so, who did the work, because I wanted to ask them questions about how they made editorial decisions. He never responded. The concerto was performed by the University of Pittsburgh Symphony Orchestra in February 2022, and the score remains on the working group site. Perry's music, once headed toward 20th century canonicity, is now rarely performed, and people want to make usable editions of this music in order to fix this. I even made one. I tell prospective editors and arrangers that I think Perry's work can be categorized as fair use when it is used for research, teaching, and nonprofit enterprises, as well as in transformative ways. Editors and arrangers can make new editions or arrangements of Perry's work, but cannot sell them as sheet music or recordings, or perform them for profit. I counsel prospective editors to include a Creative Commons license for their editions, marking them as non-commercial. And I make it very clear that neither the working group as an entity nor I bear any responsibility for their work or use of their work. I'm aware of several organizations that have made new editions over the past year using materials from the working group site, including the Lexington Philharmonic. The interface for finding scores in the group document is not the best, and at some point I or someone else will need to make the group website look a little better. But for now, Perry's extant scores are available for free for scholars and performers, and they also have a place to share information about Perry and her work. Here's a list of resources where you can find information about Perry, as well as a Zotero group, which collates documents about Perry, including primary sources and secondary sources. And here is where you can contact me, as well as the URL again for the working group. Thank you.